Okay, so what do we have to do? Take our content, rethink it as a mode of thinking, figure out the structures which transfer out into every mode of thinking, design our classrooms in this way, and then get into the nitty-gritty details with an organizing idea. So what do I want you to do today? If you're in my sociology classes, think sociologically. So what do I need? I need activities that require sociological thought. So what does that mean? You need some sociological problems to think about, because that's the only way you can think sociologically. So I say tomorrow, I would like you to come back with a description of the rules that you behave when you're in an elevator. So, title of your paper is Elevator Behavior. Question at issue, what rules control our behavior within an elevator? We're going to do this. It's called sociological thinking. Why? Because what's the organizing idea? What is sociological thinking? It's nothing more nor less than this. It's figuring out how groups control our behavior. How we behave according to three things: what is required of us, what is forbidden to us, and what is permitted. Taboos, injunctions, permissions. Every group has them. And when you can figure out, for any given group, their taboos, their requirements, and their permissions, you think sociologically. You can determine and predict the constraints within which a person is going to behave in virtue of the groups that they're members of. So you're going to analyze teams, clubs, religions, families, and learn how to identify permissions, taboos, and requirements. Now the elevator. What are you required to do when you're in an elevator? Here's the elevator. What are you required to do? You walk in. What should I do? Yes?
A recognition ceremony. Realize that you're going in and you're going to someone else's space. You look in their eyes and look at you. If they don't move,
No, it's an empty elevator.
Oh, it's empty?
What should I do? Well, I get in. Where should I go? Okay, I go to the back. Here I am. I'm in the back. Okay, I have to face the front, go to the back. Now somebody else walks in. What must they do? I'm standing over there. Here I'm now the second person. I get into the elevator, and I see this other person. What should I do?
As far away as possible.
Okay, I must move as far away as possible. They're over there, I'm over here. Now imagine they're over here, and I go up right next to them, shoulder to shoulder. Okay, are they going to be uncomfortable? They're going to be very uncomfortable because I violated a fundamental rule. Stand as far away as anyone else in the elevator. Make space. May I talk to them? That is permitted. But I may only say things of a trivial nature. That's all I'm allowed to say. So now they're in the elevator. I get in the elevator. The door closes, and I say, I have serious emotional problems. Immediately, they're disturbed because this is not allowed in an elevator. What did we do? This is called sociological thinking, thinking within the framework of group behavior to determine what is required, what is permitted, what is forbidden. Now, your assignment is ... and you're off and running. Sociological thinking, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. Sociological problem, centered instruction, gathering sociological information, coming to sociological conclusions, reasoning to those conclusions, justifying those conclusions, noticing your sociological assumptions, tracing the sociological implications, and looking at the world from a sociological standpoint. Being clear, being precise, being accurate, being relevant, being deep, being broad, being logical. And it's the same agenda, except contextualized for another mode of thinking. So we can put the students into groups of 2s, into 3s, and 4s, but this is what's happening. Now, let's look at the micro level for a couple of minutes. Let's take the assessment of writing. I've already mentioned one model, but I'm going to mention it again and sort of give you the details. But let's take writing in general. Students To think well, you have to write well. Writing is a way to discipline your thinking. It's almost impossible to tell how good your thinking is if you don't write it out, because you don't have to take responsibility for the relationships of the parts of your thought when it's sort of oral, and you often think you have a good idea until you try to work it out in writing. So writing is extremely important as a mode of thinking. Students need to write historically and scientifically and mathematically and so forth. However, if teachers had to grade all the writing that students would have to do and put feedback on all those papers, they would either have to be dishonest, inaccurate, or burn up from the work that they were doing. So most teachers, just as a practical matter, don't assign a lot of writing. Or when they assign the writing, they just sort of put a check on it or a star or a happy face or something like that and let it go at that. But that's not, students aren't going to learn to write that way. They need a lot of practice, but they also need a lot of feedback. But they don't need the feedback from you. They need the feedback from somebody who is thinking, and who is thinking in terms of the purpose and has some training in giving feedback. So who's the trainer? You're the trainer, they're the trainee. You train them in giving feedback. So now, if you were in my class and we were talking about writing, I'd give you your thou shalts and your thou shalt nots. Thou shalt not say anything that is subjective. Not allowed. I liked it, I didn't like it, it was interesting, it was not interesting. We don't want that. That's your subjective reaction. It doesn't help me. But what I want to know is, how could I make it better? That would help me. If you could show me how I could make my first paragraph better, or my first sentence, or the connection between my first paragraph and my second paragraph, that's helpful. So all feedback must be targeted to a particular place, and must contain a positive suggestion for improvement. Now you model. For example, you might say the first sentence is followed up by a second sentence that doesn't seem to be related to the first sentence, and I don't understand what the first sentence means. Couldn't you elaborate further? Okay, that's a suggestion. Or you might say, nowhere do you illustrate your main idea. Couldn't you give some kind of illustration? Or couldn't you give an example? For example, wouldn't this work? At the end of the second paragraph, couldn't you say something like this? Okay, so you model possible modes of feedback, and you could even give them lists with comments written out that might occur in many contexts, and say, these are the kinds of comments. Now then, how might this work? Well, one way it might work, you come in with your paper, and I collect all the papers, and I put you in assessment teams. Maybe they're groups of 3. And then I pass out the paper. Okay, you need 3 papers, here's 3 papers. You need 3 papers, here's 3 papers. This is what you're going to do. You're going to take out a blank sheet of paper for each paper. One of you will read that paper aloud slowly to the group, and then you'll engage in group problem solving as to how you could make the paper better. You'll write down your suggestions on the separate sheet with numbers, suggestion 1, suggestion 2, suggestion 3. You put the numbers in the margin of the original paper, and then at the end of it you sign as a member of that assessment team. That gets stapled onto the original paper and goes back to the author or authoress, who now looks at your suggestions for improvement, and in the second draft incorporates those suggestions or has reasons for not incorporating them. Now you assess 3 papers in your group, and then you get your paper back with somebody else's recommendations on it. The fact that you've assessed 3 papers and you've had to give concrete suggestions, then you get concrete suggestions on your paper. Do you have some ideas for your second draft? Typically you do. That process tends to increase, and also gives people an idea of how you improve a paper. Not by making sweeping generalizations, but by focused comments with concrete strategies combined with those. You're also teaching the students what critical thinking is. It isn't dumping on something, it's figuring out how to make it better. That's what critical thinking is, figuring out how to improve performance. All right, so that's one model. Here's another model. I come in, I say, okay, I'm going to divide you up into groups of 4s, and each of you is going to get 4 papers. You're going to read each paper to the group, and then you're going to decide which of the 4 is the best, based on the criteria up on the board. Then 2 groups of 4 are going to get together. Now they'll have only 2 papers, the best of the first group, the best of the second group. They will decide which of those 2 are the best, given these criteria. Now, in a 32-person class, there are 4 papers that are left now. 1 group of 8, second group of 8, third group of 8, fourth group of 8. Those 4 papers are read by their authors to the class as a whole, and I lead a discussion on which of those 4 is the best. And then you revise your own paper for the next day. Now, why this particular method? Because you assess 8 papers. And you hear which of the papers are better and why. And after hearing 8 papers assessed, 4 in the first group, 2 in the second group, and then 4 orally, you have ideas for improvement. That's the whole purpose. It's not to see who wrote the best paper, but to see how we can improve our papers. So that's another model.